Collective Con, I am here with Laura Martin, aka comic book colorist extraordinaire, here at Collective Con, obviously. Laura, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well, thank you. How are you?
I'm well. How are you enjoying your Collective Con experience? Is it your first time at Collective Con?
My first time here, yeah, and it's been wonderful. It's been super accommodating, and the crowds have been fantastic. It's been fun to really meet and talk with people here, and obviously there's a huge love for all kinds of fandoms here, and I just love seeing all of it, so it's fantastic.
Well said. And I understand that you grew up here in Florida. You're from the Central Florida side, graduated UCF. You're now living in Atlanta, correct?
Yes, that's right. Uh-huh.
And what's the comic scene and comic community like in Atlanta?
It's very diverse. The reason we moved there in the first place was because we knew a lot of comic professionals who live there, who work there. Guys like Adam Hughes and Kelly Hamner, Mark Brooks. A ton of artists are living there. But also, you've got some huge conventions like Dragon Con is the big one and that's like a 4-day crazy event that's downtown. But you've also got MomoCon, you've got Atlanta Comic Con, you've got a number of cons that have come up that are doing fantastic things, and each one appeals to different fandoms, different types. So you've got your, Dragon Con is a lot of fantasy, a lot of cosplay, a ton of cosplay. But then you've got MomoCon, which is more about anime and manga, but it's also bringing in a lot of American artists and stuff. And then, of course, Atlanta Comic Con is more comics oriented. So it pretty much serves every possible community you could want. So
Atlanta sounds like the mecca of nerds then.
Yes. Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, for sure.
I'm here for it. All right. So, Laura, for the uninitiated, your comic book colorist credits, are in the thousands. I looked up. I was on comicvine.com today, the massive comic database, and I think, like I said, over 1,000 credits of yours. And I'm going to ask you the very hard question of trying to hone in on maybe like a project or maybe a character that it's really memorable for you, in your very expansive career. What character or project or comic series comes to mind, when you think of ones that really kind of touched you or you grew from?
Okay, I would have to say that just because I saw the movie when it first came out, in the 90s, and I got to know the artist's work over time as I became involved in comics, and then I got to actually color his work, which was amazing, which was The Rocketeer with Dave Stevens. When he decided to republish all of his original comics into a full, singular format, he asked me to color it, and that was one of the greatest honors of my career. So I really tried to, to put what I could of Dave into these pages. And unfortunately, he passed away before he could see any of the pages colored. But he had a trust in my work that I can't even imagine. So it was a huge honor to work on that, and to see his work come back into print has been fantastic.
Wow, that is very touching. And I understand that you got into comic books a little later, I think closer to when you were in college and going for design. When you think of the comic books or that moment where you really got into comic books, is there a title or a character or creator that comes to mind that really kind of started your comic book journey in fandom?
Oh, that's a tough one. I would have to say the thing that actually sparked my interest in terms of this is not the comics I thought it was an issue of Conan that my brother had. He claims he doesn't remember this, but I swear I found a Conan with no cover on it in his room, and he's 13 years older than I am, so we have a significant age difference. But it was at the time I was reading little kid comics. I was reading Scrooge McDuck and stuff like that. So maybe the occasional Archie, but I was still kind of too young for Archie even. And I found this Conan, and I looked at the first page, and I was like, This is not Disney. This is not cartoons. And it really made me think about, wow, there's so much more that can be done visually with comic art. And I couldn't express that when I was 7, but I recognized it when I saw it. So I think that actually made me start thinking about how storytelling can be interpreted in so many different ways in a visual medium. But it probably wasn't until like I said, when I was in college, when I got reintroduced to the X-Men, but also now this image boom that was coming up at the time. And I would, the guys that I was working with at Kinko's would show me all these comics that were coming out at the time and would be like, oh, this guy's amazing. This is Frank Miller. Oh, my God, this is amazing. This is Jim Lee. And then they'd have arguments over who was the better one. And I got sucked into this as well. I was like, okay, tell me more. And so it was probably Wildcats that made me go, okay, what's this? Okay, this is new comics? This is how comics are done now. Oh, okay, bring me up to speed, come on,
Awesome.
So, yeah, that was probably the one that sort of was my my gateway drug, as it were, into the comics field.
Awesome. So. I can only imagine you opening up that Conan and just AC/DC blaring just out of nowhere.
I didn't even understand any of it. It was way over my head at the time, but there was some magic going on there that I'm like, this is very different. Also the fact that he was almost nude, but I was 7. What did I know?
Exactly. Laura, I'm going to pay you a compliment in saying that as I was kind of writing down notes to talk to you and things like that, I realized that your name, that you might be responsible for maybe like my conscious awareness of like colors, like the importance of colors to comic books. I think like your name is like among the top names that when I think of like amazing comic colorists or just comic colorists in general, you come to mind. And I wanted to hear from you, like how do you define the importance of colors in comics and the role of being a colorist? I think a lot of people immediately think of like writers and artists because their names have always kind of, graced covers for the most part for the better part of years. I think only recently we're starting to see more credit being given to colorists on the front covers. Yep. Just curious your thoughts on that.
Well, I think that it's the point of coloring is the exact same point of the writing and the penciling and inking, which is to tell the story. That's all we do. It's a collaborative process between all of the creative side of it, including lettering, to make this story interesting, readable, draw you into the visuals of it, draw you into the storytelling, draw you into the characters, pull you into the cinematography of it all. Colorists, I think, bring. That's a really good question. I'm trying to equate it with like film industry, and it's really hard because sometimes I say it's coloring is like cinematography, but it's different. It's coloring. Color has an emotional pull that maybe we don't always understand, but visually we read that interpretation and we absorb it as we're reading the comics. So, if the story is specifying a certain theme or a certain mood in a scene, colorists will take what's on the page already, what's already given to us by the pencil and inker, and interpret that into a color scheme that would enhance that mood or that sense, the tone of the story. That's a lot of what we do is to bring the tone more forward. It's also a heck of a tool for doing, things that you can't do in pencils or inks. Let's face it, that's black and white, and we have 16 million colors that we can pick from. So it's important to, tie that in, again, like I said, to the story, but also we can do things like special effects, like glows and blurs and whatnot. And it can get a little overdone, It's important to respect the art, but at the same time, these are effects that, comic artists rely on us to do now because they can't necessarily reproduce that in their own pages, or in traditional art. So I really think that coloring is just another part of the creative team. It's like I said, it's ultimately all of us are doing one vision and trying to bring that one vision to the page and to the reader ultimately, and that's where I fit in.
Well said. And I'm sure there's not one comic artist worth their spit, as they'd say, that I could name that you probably haven't colored or worked with in some capacity. But I was curious when it comes to that artist-colorist relationship, what artist comes to mind when you think of like artists that have pushed you to try new things and really elevated your own craft?
I got to take it all the way back to Bryan Hitch on The Authority, because when we started working together on Stormwatch, we were just sort of feeling each other out, and at the time I was working on staff, so there were a number of colorists working on all the books together. So it wasn't my project to begin with, but when Bryan Hitch and Warren Ellis transferred to The Authority, or transmitted that story into The Authority, I came on as a singular colorist, as the one colorist for the project. And it took a couple of issues, but Bryan finally drilled it into my head. You don't have to go with local color, which means like daylight, everyday expected color. And the minute I freed myself from that shackle, I realized I can do entire stories with just 2 colors. I can do limited palette. I can do can concentrate more on contrast and saturation and these other tools that I have that I didn't even know I had in my box that I can now really explore. So I think I got to give credit to Brian Hitch for pulling that out of me. And the other one is John Cassaday with Planetary. Again, these are two of my most formative books that I've ever done, and the fact that I was on them both as a single artist for the first time meant I got to really experiment. On Planetary, I got to experiment with Photoshop and the tricks and the tips and all the crazy stuff that Photoshop can do, because we did some amazing weird filters and crazy effects and stuff in there, and that was really fun to push Photoshop in that direction. But on the Authority, it was more about pushing the colors into a really cinematic feel. So I got to credit those two.
Awesome, and I'm glad you said those two, because I read somewhere that Brian Hitch and John Cassaday only, I guess, like, because of your relationship with them, they typically only go to you as their colorist. So I thought that was pretty cool that you reciprocated that.
Yeah, John definitely does. Brian, not so much. He's gone in a different direction now, and that's great. I love seeing his work. But John Cassaday and I are still always working together. So it's very
awesome.
cool.
And last but not least, for all of the aspiring colorists that are tuning in right now, that hope to one day be the next, Laura Martin, what is some advice that you would give them? Primarily, maybe like a piece of advice that you wish you would have received early on in your career that maybe would have saved you a lot of hassle and made your life a lot easier.
Learn how to do your taxes. Stay on a budget. Very important. No, seriously, understand how, if you're going to be a freelancer, if you're going to be a sole proprietor of your business or even have an LLC, figure that stuff out or find somebody who can do it for you, because that's the part I can't stand. I am not good at math. That's why I'm an artist. So find the person or the company that can do that for you and stick with them, and stay on the up and up with this stuff, because the IRS is no joke, let me tell you.
Pay Uncle Sam his dues. I'm so glad you said that. Thank you. Ladies and gents, comic colorist extraordinaire Laura Martin. Laura Martin, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much. I appreciate
Awesome.
it.